All right, so for this video, I'm going to talk about the summary of all 9 trig functions worksheet. This is the handout that looks like the second page is what I'm going to start off with. The resource page that you have might look different, especially the grid, the axes for inverse trig functions. Yours probably have some axes labeled, but I would prefer you to maybe use this one, which is just a blank one. Okay, so maybe you can do these one on separate sheet of paper, or you can still draw on the handout that is given to you in class, but I would highly recommend that you practice graphing it on blank axes, okay? So let me start with the basic ones. These are the regular trig functions, the first 3, and then you got the reciprocal trig functions, and the last 3 columns are the inverse trig functions. So let's start with the easy ones, sine, cosine, and tangent. I label the y-axis to -1 to +1. So then for all sine, cosine, and tangent, as you can see my y-axis. And let's graph the sine, which is mid, high, mid, low, mid. And that's your sine graph. Make sure that you always put arrows going both directions. Domain all real numbers, or you could say -infinity to +infinity. Range would be from -1 to +1. Or again, you can use interval notation. Oops. Cosine would be high, mid, low, mid, high. These should be pretty simple now. You should have these memorized already. Domain is all real numbers. Range is going to be also from -1 to +1. Tangents, they have asymptotes. I'm going to start off with asymptotes at pi/2, 3 pi/2. Same thing on the negative sides. Right in the middle of the asymptotes is your x-intercept, which are the 0 and pi radians, pi/2 pi radians, and then your right hand up, which is at pi/4 radians, going up, and one hand down. That's your tangent graph. Okay, so then once we have done that, now let's talk about domain and range. Domain, it's going to be skipping every asymptote. And remember, it doesn't matter which one you start with. So I'm going to say x is all real numbers except all my asymptotes. So it doesn't matter which one you start. I'm going to start at -pi/2 radians. So -pi/2 plus, how far is it between the asymptotes? One cycle is pi radians away. So plus pi times n. And range is all real numbers. So again, for domain of tangent, you always start by stating the first asymptote that you see. And then that would be the period of your graph, length of one cycle. In this case, they are pi radians apart each asymptotes. And then the next part that I'm going to go to are inverse trig functions. Okay, starting with inverse sine. Inverse sine goes from -1 to +1, and you go up to +pi/2, -pi/2. You got point here. And think of this as like a ripple wave going down from top to left. Okay. Domain, your x-axis is from -1 to +1. And range is -pi/2 to pi/2. Another thing that we have to remember is that if the range is from -pi/2 to pi/2, that is going to be quadrant 1, and -pi/2 is this side, quadrant 4. You have to remember that your answers are only in quadrant 1 and quadrant 4. Inverse cosine also has domains from -1 to +1. And then this time it goes up to pi. Remember, cosine of pi is -1. So then the inverse is going to have cosine of pi is -1. So then inverse cosine of -1 is pi. So you should have a point at -1 comma pi, 0 comma 2, and 1 comma 0. And then for this time, it's a wave going down from top left. And your range is going from 0 to pi radians, which on a unit circle, you have to remember that 0 to pi is going to be from quadrant 1 to quadrant 2. Solutions to inverse cosine only exist in quadrant 1 and quadrant 2. So I'm going to cover this up. Just like inverse sine, no answers here. Last one, inverse tangent. It's basically tangent, but horizontal. So tangents have asymptotes at pi over 2, negative pi over 2. So do the same thing for those ones, horizontal asymptotes. And then we got pi over 4, negative pi over 4, 1, negative 1. Tangent of pi over 4 is equal to 1. So inverse tangent of 1 is pi over 4, right? So 1 comma pi over 4, and then -1, negative pi over 4, arrows, both sides. Okay, so domain of inverse tangent is all real numbers. Range is going from negative pi over 2 to pi over 2, but notice that pi over 2s are not included. There's no equal sign there, right? No equal sign. So then interval asymptote looks like this. Doesn't matter which way you write. And then on a unit circle, that means your answers are going to be between pi over 2 and negative pi over 2, but those are not included. So quadrant 1 and quadrant 4 are going to be your answers for inverse tangent.